In the official Kennedy family portraits, Patricia Kennedy Lawford is often just one more elegant figure in a crowded frame. The sister of a president, of two senators, the quiet woman standing slightly to the side while history fixes its gaze on her brothers. But step out of the formal photographs, and her life becomes something far stranger and more cinematic. The one Kennedy daughter who tried to make it in television production, who married a Rat Pack movie star, and who raised 4 children at the exact crossroads of Boston politics and Hollywood excess. Patricia grew up as Joe and Rose Kennedy's 6th child, the 4th of their 5 daughters, shuttled between Brookline, London, and Bronxville, while her father climbed from business into diplomacy. From early on, she was fascinated by theater, film, and travel. And unlike her sisters, she did not dream of being merely a politician's wife. She wanted to produce. After Rosemont College, she pushed her way into broadcasting, working at NBC and going on to help produce one of the first network cooking shows on American television. A young woman trying to carve out authority in a medium that barely accepted women behind the camera at all. Then came Peter Lawford. The polished English actor, woven tightly into Frank Sinatra's Rat Pack, met Patricia through her brother Jack. Their 1954 marriage looked like a perfect alliance between Hollywood glamour and Kennedy power. And for a time, that's exactly what it was. They settled in Santa Monica and then Malibu, hosting parties that became legend. Senators and movie stars in the same room, Marilyn Monroe at the piano. Politics and show business mixing freely under the California sun. Out of that glittering world came 4 children, all born in Santa Monica. Christopher Kennedy Lawford in 1955, Sidney Malaya in 1956, Victoria Frances in 1958, and Robin Elizabeth in 1961. But the shine did not last. Lawford's drinking, affairs, and drug use collided with Patricia's Catholicism and the steely discipline of her family. The marriage frayed, then broke completely after the assassination of President Kennedy, and by 1966, the Hollywood Camelot union was over. Patricia moved east with the children, trading Malibu for Manhattan and movie premieres for museum benefits and library work. She battled alcoholism and cancer, yet turned her private fight into public service, working with the JFK Library, supporting the arts and throwing her energy behind addiction treatment and literacy initiatives in New York. For the 4 Lawford children, this was not just background scenery. Their childhoods ran in 2 directions at once. Toward the glamorous, brittle world of their father's industry, and toward the relentless expectations of the Kennedy political machine. They watched their parents' marriage disintegrate. They watched uncles rise and fall. They watched their mother rebuild a life out of pain and conviction. One son would become an actor, writer, and addiction recovery advocate, openly dissecting his own descent into heroin and his climb back out. One daughter would choose a life of deep privacy after marriage and motherhood. Another would move through the arts and nonprofit world, helping other branches of the family give disabled artists a stage. The youngest would grow up with the ghosts of both Hollywood and Camelot at her back, navigating a name that always meant more to strangers than it did to her. This is the story of Patricia Kennedy Lawford and her 4 children, Robin, Victoria, Sidney, and Christopher, who inherited not only a famous surname, but the full weight of what happens when celebrity and power share a roof and then violently come apart. We will move from number 4 to number 1, tracing how each child tried, in very different ways, to live a life that was their own while carrying a legacy they never asked for. Number 4. Robin Elizabeth Lawford. Number 4 is Robin Elizabeth Lawford, born in 1961, the youngest of Patricia Kennedy Lawford's 4 children, and the one who grew up in the long shadow of 2 collapsing worlds, the Kennedy political dynasty and the Hollywood dreamscape that had first enchanted, then shattered, her parents' marriage. Robin was the child who arrived just as everything was beginning to fall apart. By the time she was old enough to form memories, the Lawford-Kennedy alliance had already fractured, leaving her childhood suspended between glamour that no longer existed and a family searching for footing after yet another Kennedy tragedy. Robin was still a toddler when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, an event that detonated her mother's emotional stability and hastened the disintegration of the Lawford marriage. Patricia packed up her youngest daughter along with her 3 older siblings and left California, leaving behind the Ocean View home, the Rat Pack circle, the film sets, and late-night parties. Robin's earliest conscious memories were not of movie stars, but of a mother fighting to rebuild a life in New York. A mother grieving a brother, grieving a marriage, and fighting her own battle with alcoholism while trying to keep her children anchored. Because she was the youngest, Robin absorbed the family story differently from her siblings. She did not witness the golden years of the Kennedy-Hollywood connection. She did not grow up with Sinatra dropping by the house or with her father in daily orbit of celebrity circles. Instead, she grew up with the aftermath. The quieter world of Patricia's second act, the more modest apartments, the endless network of Kennedy cousins, the museum events, the fundraisers, the private family gatherings where the weight of lost potential hung in the air. The turning point in Robin's life came when she chose a path deliberately outside the public narrative. While her siblings tested the entertainment world, public advocacy, or high-visibility creative work, Robin chose privacy. She moved steadily away from the spotlight, pursuing education, personal development, and later philanthropic interests with a level of discretion rare in the Kennedy orbit. She made a life built not on surname recognition, but on careful boundaries. A life that resisted the gravitational pull of a dynasty that had claimed so many of its young. Robin's relationship with her mother was especially tender. Patricia, who had endured a painful marriage and a lifetime of public expectation, found in her youngest daughter a source of emotional steadiness. Robin accompanied her mother through her final decades, the museum work, the charity events, the health struggles, and after Patricia's death, Robin became one of the quiet guardians of her mother's legacy, ensuring that Patricia's artistic work and philanthropic efforts remained remembered even if they were never as famous as those of her siblings. Robin Lawford's legacy is one of intentional obscurity, not as retreat, but as survival. She represents the most human response to the Kennedy myth, the refusal to let a name dictate the shape of a life. Through Robin, we see the possibility of carving out normalcy from chaos, of building a life defined not by family mythology, but by personal integrity. Number 3. Victoria Frances Lawford. Number 3 is Victoria Frances Lawford. Born in 1958, the daughter who inherited her mother's instinct for arts, culture, and service, and who spent her life moving between the Kennedy world and the creative world her mother once tried to claim for herself. Victoria's story does not have the cinematic turbulence of her brother Christopher's or the deep retreat of her sister Robin's. Instead, it is defined by steadiness, quiet contribution, and a deeply felt loyalty to the parts of her family's legacy that revolved around creativity, inclusion, and public service. Victoria, known to family and friends as Vicky, spent her earliest years in the glittering world of Malibu, one of the last Kennedy children to truly experience the surreal combination of political royalty and Hollywood glamour that defined the early Lawford household. She was still young when Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and half of California's film aristocracy drifted through her parents' home. But by the time Vicky reached school age, the marriage was already deteriorating. And when Patricia finally fled California with her 4 children, Vicky's life shifted from movie star spectacle to the more austere and structured world of East Coast Kennedy expectations. The turning point in Vicky's life came in adolescence, when she realized she did not want the spotlight. But she did want meaning. She was drawn to the same spaces her mother loved: art programs, cultural organizations, youth initiatives, and especially the expanding world of Special Olympics and very special arts, founded by her aunts Eunice and John. Vicky's sensibility was artistic rather than political, empathetic rather than performative. She volunteered, organized, supported. She understood instinctively the Kennedy philosophy that leadership does not require a podium. Sometimes it requires presence. As an adult, Vicky built a life that maintained this balance. She worked in arts-related environments, supported disability inclusion initiatives, and aligned herself with organizations that made room for voices the world tended to overlook. She did not pursue fame, nor did she allow her last name to dictate her identity. Instead, she embodied the quieter tradition of the Kennedy women, those who served causes and communities without chasing publicity or acclaim. Her relationship with her mother remained a central thread. Patricia, who had fought so hard to find her place in a family dominated by powerful men, saw in Vicky a daughter who carried her gentler ambitions forward. When Patricia became active in the arts, in museum work, in promoting literacy and cultural programming, Vicky was often nearby, not as an assistant, but as someone who shared the same instinctive respect for artistic expression as a tool for healing. Though not a public figure in the traditional sense, Vicky was a familial anchor in a clan that has known too much turbulence. She offered stability without rigidity, compassion without spectacle. Quietly, thoroughly, she embodied the best of her mother's second life. The part that was about creation, support, dignity, and emotional steadiness after chaos. Victoria Frances Lawford's legacy is that of the grounded artist. She represents the part of the Kennedy story often overshadowed by politics, the belief that culture can be a form of service, and that a meaningful life can be built not through headlines, but through care, consistency, and creative contribution. Number 2. Sydney Malaya Lawford. Number 2 is Sydney Malaya Lawford. Born in 1956, the daughter who inherited, in equal measure, the artistic sensibility of her mother and the restless charisma of her father's Hollywood world. If Robin represents escape and Vicky represents steadiness, Sydney represents engagement. A woman who stepped into public-facing spaces not to chase attention, but to uphold the Kennedy tradition of service, advocacy, and cultural contribution. Sydney's childhood unfolded in two dramatically different worlds. She spent her earliest years in Malibu, living among the constellation of actors, musicians, and political figures who gravitated toward Peter Lawford's orbit. But unlike her older brother Christopher, she was young enough that she absorbed this environment without yet understanding its fractures. By the time she was old enough to perceive the instability behind the glamour, Patricia had already uprooted the children and returned east, where the rhythms of Kennedy life, charity events, museums, libraries, cousins, structure, took over. The turning point in Sydney's life came in her teens, when she showed a clear talent for the arts and an equally strong instinct for service. She became deeply connected to organizations tied to her aunts, especially Special Olympics and Very Special Arts. These programs allowed her to merge her mother's passions, creativity, culture, education, with the broader Kennedy mission of inclusion. Sydney gravitated toward platforms where art was used not as entertainment, but as empowerment, giving disabled artists and performers a voice that society had long denied them. As she moved into adulthood, Sydney pursued work in arts administration, nonprofit programming, and cultural advocacy. She became known within the Kennedy network as someone who understood the mechanics behind public events, how to organize them, how to fund them, how to make them meaningful rather than symbolic. She represented the family at functions, supported new initiatives, and lent her presence to causes that required both visibility and empathy. In her personal life, Sydney built an identity separate from the chaos of her parents' marriage. She became a devoted mother and partner, creating a stable home environment her own childhood had often lacked. Those who know her describe her as warm, thoughtful, and unwavering in her loyalty. The kind of family member who shows up quietly but consistently, without the drama that has followed so many Kennedy descendants. Sydney also served as a link between the Lawford siblings during Patricia's later years. When Patricia battled alcoholism and later cancer, Sydney was among the children who provided emotional and logistical support. She helped protect her mother's privacy, upheld her dignity, and ensured that Patricia's artistic and philanthropic work continued to resonate beyond her lifetime. Sydney Malaya Lawford's legacy is one of cultural stewardship. She represents the Kennedy belief that art is not an accessory to public life, but a core part of it, a way to heal, to connect, to expand what society imagines possible. Through her work, both public and private, Sydney turned her mother's creative ambitions into a sustainable, living practice. Number 1. Christopher Kennedy Lawford. Number 1 is Christopher Kennedy Lawford, born in 1955, the eldest child of Patricia Kennedy Lawford and Peter Lawford, and the one whose life captured, in raw and unfiltered form, the collision between Hollywood glamour and Kennedy expectation. If his siblings navigated their inheritance through privacy or quiet service, Christopher confronted the full force of both worlds head-on. His story is the most turbulent, the most public, and ultimately the most redemptive of the four. Christopher was born into a life that promised spectacle. His father was a movie star, his uncle was a senator on the rise, and by the time he was 8 years old, his uncle John had become President of the United States. He spent his earliest years in Malibu, surrounded by Rat Pack stars, producers, models, and musicians. His father's circle, glamorous on the outside, was riddled with the excess that would later claim Peter Lawford's health and career. Christopher saw the contradictions of fame early. The applause, the addictions, the late nights, the fractures that spread behind the scenes. The turning point, the first one, came in 1963. President Kennedy's assassination shattered the emotional foundation of the entire family. Patricia's marriage crumbled in the aftermath, and Christopher was uprooted from California and moved to the East Coast. The boy who had been raised in sunshine and celebrity now found himself navigating New York's stricter rhythms, Kennedy family expectations, and a mother struggling with grief, alcohol, and the pressure of raising 4 children alone. Christopher internalized much of this turmoil. By his teens, he was already experimenting with drugs, a dangerous inheritance from both his father's Hollywood milieu and the numbing silence around emotional pain in his family. Heroin took hold in his 20s. Cocaine and alcohol followed. For years, Christopher drifted through addiction, burning bridges, sabotaging opportunities, and nearly destroying himself in the process. Then came the second turning point, the pivot that saved his life. After multiple overdoses and a near-fatal collapse, Christopher entered recovery. It was not quick, and it was not glamorous. It was brutal, humbling, relentless work. But he did it. And when he emerged sober, he rebuilt himself not around fame, but around service. Christopher became a writer, actor, and public speaker. But above all, he became one of the most important addiction recovery advocates of his generation. His memoir, Symptoms of Withdrawal, stunned the public with its honesty. He wrote and spoke not with shame, but with a mission: to break the cycle of secrecy that had haunted his own life and so many others. He worked with public health organizations, partnered with state governments on addiction initiatives, and became a steadfast voice for recovery communities across the country. His work was raw, human, and profoundly courageous. He also reclaimed his family identity on his own terms. Yes, he acted, appearing in films and television. Yes, he wrote, publishing books on recovery and mental health. But he did not live as a Kennedy symbol. He lived as a man committed to making amends, to healing, to telling the truth. His advocacy saved lives. His candor changed public conversation. Christopher Kennedy Lawford's legacy is redemption forged into service. He is the child who fell the furthest and climbed the hardest, transforming personal devastation into a platform of compassion and clarity. Through him, Patricia Kennedy Lawford's difficult years become something more than tragedy. They become the soil from which her eldest son grew into a champion for millions still struggling in the dark. Patricia Kennedy Lawford's life is often overshadowed by the more famous arcs of her brothers. The presidency, the assassinations, the Senate triumphs, the political mythology that came to define the Kennedy name. But when her story is viewed through the lives of her 4 children, something far more intimate and revealing comes into focus. Her legacy is not written in legislation or campaign speeches. It is written in 4 profoundly human journeys shaped by love, upheaval, glamour, loss, and the long shadow of 2 powerful worlds. Robin, the youngest, represents the quiet reclamation of self. She chose a life away from notoriety, building stability where her childhood had offered none. In her refusal to be defined by public expectation, she preserved a core of emotional truth that so many in her family struggled to find. Victoria reflects continuity without fanfare. She inherited her mother's affinity for the arts, for gentle contribution, for sustaining what others create. Her life shows that service does not need spotlight, and that the Kennedy legacy has always depended on those who work faithfully in its quieter rooms. Sydney embodies engagement without spectacle. She stepped into public spaces, cultural programming, disability advocacy, family initiatives, not to perform, but to support. She upheld the artistic and humanitarian values Patricia cherished, translating them into real work, real programs, real community impact. And Christopher, brilliant, wounded, defiant, redemptive, reveals the full cost and possibility of the Kennedy story. His descent into addiction was a mirror of the family's darkest cycles. His recovery and advocacy were a testament to its deepest courage. Through him, Patricia's struggles became fuel for a movement that helped others break free from the same shadows. Together, these 4 children form a portrait of a woman whose legacy was not measured in political victories, but in resilience. Patricia Kennedy Lawford survived Hollywood, survived heartbreak, survived the darkest years of her famous family. And in the process, she raised children who learned to survive, too, each in their own way. They did not inherit a clean, polished destiny. They inherited chaos, brilliance, and the impossible work of forging identity beyond a name known around the world. Yet through their stories, Patricia's true legacy emerges. Not glamour or tragedy, but strength. The strength of a mother who fought to rebuild, to recover, and to raise children who could carry forward the best parts of who she was. In the end, the Lawford-Kennedy line is not a story of perfection. It is a story of endurance, reinvention, and the quiet, persistent work of turning pain into character. Each child reflects a facet of Patricia's spirit: artistic, empathetic, wounded, resilient. And together, they transform her life from a Kennedy footnote into a legacy entirely her own.